Let me ask you something, and I want you to think about this carefully before you answer. When you speak English, what happens first inside your mind? Do you think of the idea you want to express? And then, does it come out in English naturally? Or do you think of it first in your native language, then translate it into English, and then finally say it out loud? If you answered the second one, I want you to pause for a moment. Because that one small difference between those two processes is the reason some people speak English fluently and confidently, and others, no matter how many years they have studied, still feel stuck, still feel slow, still feel like English is something they are doing rather than something they are speaking. And here is what I want you to do right now. I want you to answer this question in the comments section of this video. The question is this: what is the one English phrase or expression that you always translate in your head before you can say it? Write it in the comments. Write the phrase you always translate. And by the end of this video, I want you to come back to that comment and tell me whether or not you still feel like you need to translate it. That is our little experiment today, and I genuinely want to see your answers. Now, before we go any further, I want to say one thing directly. If you are someone who has been learning English for years, if you have studied grammar books and watched movies and practiced vocabulary and still feel like something is blocking you from true fluency, then this video was made for you. Not for beginners, not for people who have just started. This is for the person who already has knowledge but cannot unlock it. This is for the person whose brain knows English but whose mouth cannot seem to follow. If this channel has helped you in the past, or if today is your first time here, please subscribe right now before we go any further. We release deep structured English fluency content every week, and everything on this channel is designed to give you real tools, not surface advice. Subscribe, and let us begin this journey together. This is the Speaking Reset, and today we are going to go deep. Chapter 1: Why your brain keeps translating, and why it is not your fault. I want to start by removing something from your shoulders right now. The translation habit that you have, the one that slows you down, the one that makes you pause mid-sentence and search for words, the one that makes you feel like you are always one step behind in a conversation, that is not a personal failure. That is not a sign of low intelligence. That is not proof that you are bad at languages. It is the natural result of how you were taught. Let me explain this very carefully, because this is foundational to everything else we will talk about today. When you were a child learning your native language, nobody sat you down and taught you grammar. Nobody gave you a list of rules to memorize. Nobody said, "Here is a worksheet. Here are the verb conjugations. Here is the correct sentence structure." What happened, instead, was something completely different. You were surrounded by the language. You heard it constantly. You connected sounds to objects, to feelings, to experiences, to faces, to emotions. You built up an internal map of the language not through rules, but through repeated exposure and real use in real situations. Your brain did not think about the language. Your brain used the language to think. That is a critical distinction. When you are a native speaker of any language, the language is transparent. You do not see the language. You see through it, the way you see through a clean window to the world outside. You are not looking at the glass. You are looking at what is on the other side. Now, compare that to how most people learn a second language, including English. They sit in a classroom. They study grammar charts. They learn vocabulary lists. They practice making sentences according to rules. They are taught to construct English, to build it piece by piece, like assembling furniture with an instruction manual. And the result is that in their minds, English exists as a separate cognitive layer, a secondary system, a translator program that runs in the background every single time they want to say something. So, when you want to say something in English, here is what your brain does. It generates the thought in your native language first, because that is the system it trusts. That is the system it built first and used first and feels most natural with. Then, it takes that thought and passes it through the translation layer. It searches for the English equivalent. It checks the grammar rules it was taught. It assembles the sentence, and then finally, it outputs the English. By that time, 3 to 5 seconds have passed. The conversation has moved on. The moment is gone, and you feel frustrated and slow. This is not your fault. This is exactly what happens when a brain is taught a language the wrong way. And the reason we're here today is to talk about how to correct it. But before we get to the solutions, I need you to understand one more thing about the translation habit, because most people do not realize how deep it goes. They think it is just about speaking. They think, okay, when I speak English, I translate. But actually, the translation habit affects your listening, too. When someone speaks to you in English, many learners do not process the English directly. They are translating it into their native language in real time, processing the meaning in their native language, formulating a response in their native language, and then translating that response back into English. This is why fast native speakers are so difficult to understand. It is not that they are speaking too fast in absolute terms. It is that your brain is doing too much work because it is running two languages simultaneously instead of just one. And this is why grammar study, no matter how thorough, will never solve the fluency problem on its own. Grammar study adds more rules to the system that is already slowing you down. What you need is not more rules. What you need is a completely different system. And that system is what we are going to build today, chapter by chapter, piece by piece, in a way that is practical, that is grounded in how the brain actually works, and that you can start applying the moment this video ends. So, the first thing I need you to accept, genuinely accept, not just intellectually understand, but actually accept, is this: you do not need to translate. You were never supposed to translate. The entire translation process is an artifact of how you were taught. It is a learned habit, and learned habits can be unlearned. They can be replaced. They can be rewired. Let me tell you about someone I want you to picture. Imagine a learner who has been studying English for 8 years. 8 years. They passed every exam. They got high scores on standardized tests. They know vocabulary words that native speakers have never heard of. They can read a sophisticated English novel and understand almost every paragraph. And yet, when they are in a real conversation with an English speaker, they freeze. They speak slowly. They feel deeply uncomfortable. And after the conversation, they go home and think, why can I not do this? Why do all those years of study not show up when I actually need them? This person exists all over the world, in every country, in every age group, in every profession. And the reason they are stuck is not because they are bad at English. It is because they have been building the wrong thing. They have been building knowledge of English rather than fluency in English. And those are not the same thing. Knowledge is what you can access when you are calm, alone, and given plenty of time. Fluency is what comes out when you are in the middle of a real, fast, unpredictable human interaction. And fluency requires a completely different kind of brain training than knowledge. Here is another thing I want you to understand about the translation habit. It is not just slow, it is actually inaccurate. And this surprises people when they first hear it. When you think of something in your native language and then translate it into English, the translation is never perfect. Every language carves up reality slightly differently. Your native language has words and concepts and structures that do not map cleanly onto English. And English has words and concepts and structures that do not map cleanly onto your native language. So, when you translate, you are always approximating. You are always losing something. You are always producing English that sounds slightly off, slightly foreign, slightly like a translation rather than like original thought expressed in English. When someone thinks directly in English, they are not translating. They are originating. The thought and the language are born together, and the result is English that flows naturally, that carries the right idioms, that uses the right register. That sounds like a real human being expressing a real thought in the language they are speaking. That is what direct English thinking produces. And that is what translation can never fully replicate. I want you to hold on to one image as we go through this video. Think of your brain right now as a city with two districts. One district is your native language district, and it is huge. It has wide roads, tall buildings, fast transportation, everything connected, everything efficient. Everything just works there. The second district is your English district. And right now, it might feel small, it might feel incomplete. But more importantly, the only road connecting the two districts goes through the translation bridge. And that bridge is the bottleneck. What we are going to do throughout this video is not demolish the bridge. We are going to build new direct roads into the English district. Roads that do not go through translation at all. Roads that connect your thoughts directly to English output. And when those roads are built, when those pathways exist in your brain, everything changes. Speed changes. Confidence changes. The feeling of English changes entirely. This is possible. This is neuroscience. And this is what we are here to do. Let me go even deeper on one specific aspect of the translation habit that I think will resonate with many of you. Think about a time when you were speaking English and you were doing reasonably well. The words were coming, the conversation was flowing, and then suddenly someone asked you an unexpected question, something you did not anticipate. Maybe they used an expression you had not heard before, or they changed the subject very suddenly, or they spoke faster than usual. And in that moment, everything stopped. The flow disappeared. The English you had access to just a moment before seemed to vanish. You went blank. This experience is so common among English learners that it has almost become a defining feature of the intermediate plateau. And what is happening in that moment is entirely explained by the translation habit. When everything is going well, you are managing the translation process at a speed that feels almost comfortable. You have done this conversation many times in your head. You have practiced these kinds of phrases. Your translation engine is warmed up and running relatively smoothly. But then the unexpected happens. The context shifts, and suddenly the translation engine cannot find what it needs fast enough. The native language has the thought, but the English equivalent is not coming. And the result is the blank. Direct English thinkers do not have this experience in the same way because they are not dependent on a translation engine that can fail. When the unexpected question comes, their brain does not need to find an English equivalent for a native language thought. It just needs to think in English about the new topic, which is exactly what it does in the native language all the time without any effort. The blank disappears when the translation disappears. This is one of the most concrete, practical benefits of everything we are going to talk about today. Not just faster speech in comfortable situations, but genuine adaptability in unexpected ones. The ability to handle the curveballs of real conversation without freezing, because your English is not dependent on a fragile translation process, but on a direct cognitive relationship with the language itself. Chapter 2. What it actually means to think in English. When most English learners hear the phrase think in English, they imagine something mystical. They imagine some advanced level they have not reached yet. They imagine it as the destination that only very fluent people arrive at. And they picture themselves far away from it, separated by years of study and practice they have not yet done. I want to completely reframe that for you today, because that picture is wrong. Thinking in English is not the destination. It is the vehicle. It is not something that happens after you become fluent. It is the thing that makes you fluent. And most importantly, it is something you can begin doing right now at your current level with the vocabulary and knowledge you already have. Let me explain what thinking in English actually means in real practical terms, because the phrase itself is vague, and vague instructions do not produce real change. Thinking in English means that when a concept arises in your mind, your first attempt to label it, express it, or process, it uses English words and English structures rather than your native language words and structures. That is it. That is the whole definition. It is not about thinking perfectly. It is not about thinking with a full, grammatically correct sentence in your head. It is about the direction of the first attempt. Let me give you a very simple example. Suppose you see a beautiful sunset. Right now, if you are used to translating, your brain might label that experience in your native language first. Whatever your native word for beautiful is, whatever your native word for sky is, those words light up first. And then you might think, how do I say this in English? And the translation process begins. Thinking in English means that the first thing that lights up when you see that sunset is an English word or phrase. Beautiful. Amazing sky. Look at those colors. It does not have to be a perfect sentence. It does not have to be grammatically structured. It just has to be English words connecting directly to the experience without the native language step in between. Now, I want to make something very clear because this is where a lot of people misunderstand. Thinking in English does not mean you need to erase your native language from your brain. That is impossible and frankly ridiculous to attempt. Your native language will always be there. It is your mother tongue. It is part of who you are. What we are doing is not replacing it. We are building a parallel system that can operate independently of it. Think of it like this. You probably know how to type. And when you type, your fingers move to the right keys without you consciously thinking about where each key is. You are not thinking, the letter E is in the top left section of the keyboard, third from the left. I need to extend my left middle finger upward to reach it. You are just typing. The connection between your intention and your action is direct and automatic. That is exactly what thinking in English feels like when it is working properly. The connection between your thought and the English expression of that thought becomes direct and automatic. There is no conscious translation step. There is no grammar check running in the background. There is just the thought and then the English. Now, here is the question I know you are thinking. That sounds great, but how do you get there? How do you make those connections direct and automatic when right now they feel anything but direct? The answer is through three things: repetition, immersion, and intention. And we are going to cover all three in detail in the chapters ahead. But right now, I want to give you the foundational understanding of why these three things work, because understanding the why will make you far more committed to the how. Your brain is built on a principle called neural efficiency. Essentially, the pathways in your brain that you use most often become faster and more automatic, and the pathways you use least often become slower and less accessible. This is called synaptic strengthening, and it is the basis of all learning and habit formation. When you practice translating from your native language to English, you are strengthening the translation pathway. You are making that route faster, more automatic, more default. But when you practice connecting thoughts directly to English without translation, you are building a new pathway, one that bypasses the translation step entirely. This is why simply studying more English will not fix the translation habit. If you study English by reading grammar explanations in your native language, or by watching English videos with subtitles in your native language, you are reinforcing the connection between your native language and English, which means you are strengthening the translation pathway. You are making translation faster, not eliminating it. The only way to eliminate the translation pathway as your default is to stop using it. To deliberately, consistently, and intentionally force your brain to process English directly without using your native language as the middleman. And while that sounds simple, it requires a specific kind of practice that most people have never been taught. There is another dimension to thinking in English that very few people talk about, and it is this: thinking in English is emotional, not just cognitive. When you think in your native language, your thoughts carry the full emotional weight of that language. The words feel real. They feel warm. They feel connected to your identity, your memories, your relationships. English for most learners feels colder and more mechanical because the emotional connections to English words are weaker. But here is the thing: those emotional connections are not permanent. They are not fixed by biology. They are built through experience. Every native English speaker has those emotional connections to English words because those words were connected to real experiences, real emotions, real moments in their lives, and you can build the same connections. Not instantly, not overnight, but through deliberate practice of a specific kind that we will discuss in depth in the chapters ahead. There is a moment that many advanced learners describe, a specific turning point they can often remember quite vividly. It is the moment when they were in a situation, usually an emotionally charged one, a moment of surprise or laughter or urgency or joy, and an English thought or phrase arose in their mind first before their native language had time to intervene. It was just a flash, just one phrase, but they remember it because it felt different. It felt like the English was coming from somewhere real, somewhere inside them, rather than being constructed from the outside. That flash of direct English thought is the beginning of genuine thinking in English, and it is available to you earlier in your journey than you might think. You do not have to wait for years of study. You have to create the right conditions, and those conditions are what this video is designed to give you. The goal is not for English to feel like a foreign system you are operating. The goal is for English to feel like a natural extension of yourself, like a voice that is genuinely yours, not a translation of your real voice. And I promise you, that is achievable. People do it every day, and every single one of them went through a process, a specific, learnable, repeatable process of rewiring how their brain relates to the language. That process is what this video is designed to give you. I want to share with you a specific exercise that bridges the gap between understanding thinking in English and actually doing it, because many learners find that the concept makes sense, but the practice feels elusive. This exercise is called the 5 senses anchor. The 5 senses anchor works like this. Right now, wherever you are, take 30 seconds and notice 5 things around you using each of your senses. What do you see? What do you hear? What can you feel physically in your body or in contact with your body? What can you smell or taste? The point is not the observation itself. The point is that you make each of these observations in English directly without any native language step. I see a window with light coming through it. I hear traffic outside. I feel the chair under me. I smell coffee from somewhere nearby. I taste nothing right now, but my mouth is dry. These are simple sentences. They are not impressive, but they are direct English observations of your immediate reality. No translation, no construction, just English applied directly to experience. And this is the fundamental unit of thinking in English, not complex analysis, not sophisticated opinions, just this. Direct observation in English applied to what is actually happening right now. Practice the 5 senses anchor several times a day in different locations. at different times, on the bus, at your desk, in your kitchen, in a park. Over time, the observing your reality in English becomes automatic, and from there, the internal English monologue expands naturally into more complex thought. It's with what I see and what I hear. It grows into what I think and what I feel, and eventually, it becomes the full English inner voice that characterizes genuine fluency. Chapter 3: The Grammar Trap. Why studying rules is keeping you stuck. I am going to say something now that might go against everything you have been taught about learning English. And I want you to sit with it and really consider it before you react. Grammar study, as most people do it, does more harm than good when it comes to fluency. I am not saying grammar is unimportant. I am not saying you should ignore it completely. I am saying that the way most people study grammar as a set of rules to memorize and apply consciously during speech is actively working against the kind of automatic, fluent communication we are talking about in this video. Here is why. When you are in a real conversation, whether at work, with friends, in a store, on the phone, you do not have time to consciously apply grammar rules. A conversation moves too fast. If you are in the middle of a sentence and you stop to think, okay, is this present perfect or simple past? Is this a countable or uncountable noun? Do I need an article here? Should I use which or that? The conversation is over before your sentence is. The other person has moved on. You are left standing there with an unfinished thought and a growing feeling of inadequacy. This is the grammar trap. You studied grammar to improve your English, and instead, you created a mental obstacle course that you now have to run every single time you want to speak. Every sentence becomes a grammar test, and no one speaks fluently when every sentence feels like a test. Now, let me be precise about something. I am not telling you that grammar does not matter. I am telling you that grammar is something that should be acquired, not applied. There is a profound difference between those two things. When a native English speaker says a sentence, they do not think about grammar. They just speak, and the grammar is correct because it feels right, because they have heard the correct structure so many times that it has become instinctive. They could not necessarily tell you the grammar rule they are using, but they can tell you immediately when something sounds wrong because it violates an internal pattern they have built up over years of exposure. That internal pattern is acquired grammar, and it operates below the level of conscious thought. Studied grammar, on the other hand, the kind you get from textbooks, is explicit knowledge. It lives in the conscious part of your brain, and conscious thought is slow. Conscious thought is what you use when you are solving a math problem or planning a route on a map. It is deliberate, step-by-step analytical processing. It is the opposite of what fluent speech requires. Fluent speech requires implicit knowledge, pattern-based, automatic, instinctive knowledge that fires without conscious effort. And the only way to build implicit language knowledge is through massive exposure and meaningful use of the language, not through memorizing rules. Here is a question I want you to think about. How many grammar rules can you recite right now? Probably quite a few. Now, here is the more important question. How many of those rules can you apply automatically without conscious effort in the middle of a fast conversation? Very few, maybe none. And that gap between the rules you know and the rules you can automatically apply, that gap is the grammar trap. The most fluent non-native English speakers in the world are not the ones who know the most grammar rules. They are the ones who have the most acquired grammatical instinct built through hearing and using real English in real contexts over and over until the patterns are so deeply embedded that applying them requires no conscious effort at all. Think about some of the most fluent multilingual speakers you might know or have seen. Many of them will tell you that they cannot explain the grammar of their second language very well, but they speak it flawlessly. And some of them will also tell you that they have met people who know every grammar rule in their second language perfectly, but speak haltingly and awkwardly. The rule knowers are often less fluent than the natural acquirers, and that should tell you something fundamental. There is a concept in linguistics called the interface problem that relates to this. The interface problem is essentially the challenge of getting explicit, conscious knowledge of grammar to convert into the implicit, automatic knowledge that drives real-time speech. And research consistently shows that this conversion is extremely difficult through direct study alone. You cannot simply learn a rule consciously and expect it to become automatic through willpower. Automatization requires a specific type of practice, and that practice is communicative, not analytical. Let me give you a very concrete example of this. The word get is one of the most commonly used words in English, and it has an enormous variety of meanings and uses that no grammar rule fully captures. Get tired, get to work, get it done, get along with someone, get over something, get away, get back to me. No grammar book teaches you all of these in a way that makes them feel natural. But if you immerse yourself in enough authentic English conversation, enough podcasts, enough films, enough real interactions, you absorb these uses naturally. They start to feel right because you have heard them in context so many times. And that feeling of rightness is acquired grammar working exactly as it should. So, here is what I want you to take from this chapter. Stop thinking of grammar as something you need to master before you can speak. Start thinking of grammar as something that will develop naturally as a byproduct of massive, meaningful engagement with real English. You do not need to understand grammar to speak correctly any more than a bird needs to understand aerodynamics to fly. There is one more thing I want to add here that is genuinely liberating if you let it be. Grammatical errors in spoken English are far less noticeable and far less important than most learners believe. Native speakers hear errors in your speech, and they typically correct them internally and keep listening to your meaning. They do not stop you. They do not judge you harshly. They focus on what you are trying to communicate. The fear that a grammar mistake will make you seem uneducated or incompetent is a fear that lives inside the learner, not in the mind of the native speaker. Your mistakes will rarely cost you as much as your silence. So, speak. Speak imperfectly. Speak with errors. And trust that the grammar will improve as your exposure and use increase, because it will. The grammar trap has held enough learners back for long enough. It is time to step out of it. I want to address something specifically about the fear of making grammar mistakes that goes beyond what we have already discussed, because I think it runs deeper in many learners than they realize. For many people who learned English in a school setting, grammar correction was a regular, visible, sometimes public experience. A teacher marked your work. Errors were circled in red. The feeling of being wrong was associated with grammar in a very direct, very early, very formative way. And this creates something that psychologists call a conditioned emotional response. Grammar mistakes do not just feel inconvenient. They feel shameful. They trigger a kind of social anxiety that has its roots in those early classroom experiences. Understanding this is important because it explains why simply knowing that grammar mistakes are okay does not always stop the fear of making them. The fear is not rational. It is conditioned, and conditioned responses require more than rational reassurance to change. They require repeated exposure to the feared stimulus in a safe context, which is exactly what the practice methods in this video provide. Every time you speak English imperfectly in a low-stakes context, whether alone in think out loud practice or in a friendly conversation online, and you survive it, and the world does not end, and the communication still happens, you are slowly desensitizing that conditioned response. You are training your nervous system to experience grammar imperfection as safe. And over time, that safety spreads into higher stakes context, too. This is one of the reasons I emphasize starting with solo practice before jumping into high-pressure conversations. Not because solo practice is the destination, but because it gives you a space to build a habit of speaking without the grammar monitor at full volume. A space where imperfection has no social consequences. And in that space, the rewiring happens not just cognitively, but emotionally. Both levels need to shift for genuine fluency to emerge. Chapter 4. How native speakers really process language. If you could look inside the brain of a native English speaker while they are having a conversation, you would not see a grammar checker running. You would not see a translation engine. You would not see a vocabulary database being searched. What you would see, if neuroscience could give us that kind of picture, is something that looks almost like music. A flow of patterns activating and connecting in milliseconds, generating language the way a musician generates music. Not by reading notes from a sheet, but by feeling the music and letting it come. Understanding how native speakers actually process language is one of the most liberating things you can do as an English learner. Because once you understand it, you realize that the goal is not to become faster at the process you are currently using. The goal is to change the process entirely. Let me walk you through what is actually happening in a native speaker's brain during conversation. When a native speaker wants to say something, they start with meaning, not with words, not with grammar, with meaning. A feeling, an idea, an intention, something they want to communicate. And that meaning immediately begins to activate language. Not through translation, not through rule application, but through a process called lexical access, which is the direct retrieval of words and phrases from long-term memory. Here is the crucial part. Native speakers do not retrieve single words and then assemble them according to grammar rules. They retrieve chunks. Chunks are groups of words that are stored and retrieved together as single units because they have been used together so many times that the brain stores them as one thing rather than as individual words that need to be combined. Some examples of chunks are, as far as I know, it depends on, I'm not sure about that. The thing is, what I mean is, to be honest with you, let me think about that. I have no idea. Can you say that again? What are you talking about? How long have you been here? Each of these is not a collection of individual words that a native speaker assembles from scratch every time. It is a single unit that gets retrieved whole from memory and placed in the speech stream. The native speaker does not think about the grammar of these chunks. They do not think, I need a subordinating clause here, followed by a present perfect structure. They just think, I want to express uncertainty. And the chunk, as far as I know, appears in their speech immediately, automatically, and correctly. This is called chunked speech, and it is the foundation of natural-sounding fluency. When you hear native speakers and think they are speaking too fast, part of what is happening is that they are stringing together pre-packaged chunks of language with extraordinary speed, because each chunk is a single unit of retrieval. They are not building sentences word by word. They are producing them phrase by phrase, and each phrase fires as a whole. This is a revolutionary insight for language learners because it changes the entire target. The target is not to learn more words. The target is to build a library of chunks, natural, frequently used groups of words that you can retrieve as single units and place in your speech without conscious assembly. And this is exactly where grammar study fails most learners. Grammar study teaches you rules for assembling words. But fluency is not about assembling words. Fluency is about retrieving chunks. The grammar is already baked into the chunk. You do not apply it. You just use the chunk. And the grammar is automatically correct because it was correct when the chunk was formed. Now, let us go deeper into the native speaker's process because there is another layer here that is equally important. Native speakers operate with what linguists call an internal monitor that is turned almost all the way down. What this means is that they are not checking their own speech as they produce it. They are trusting the language. They are trusting that what comes out will be right, because for the vast majority of utterances, experience tells them it will be. They have said similar things thousands of times and it has worked thousands of times, so the internal monitor, the self-correction, compare this to what most English learners do. They turn the internal monitor all the way up. They are checking every word, every structure, every tense choice, every article in real time as they speak. And this creates a fundamental problem. You cannot check and produce simultaneously at full speed. You can check or you can produce. When you are checking, production slows to a crawl. When you are producing, checking has to step back. Native speakers have internalized so much language that they can produce at full speed and trust that the monitor will catch major errors when needed while letting the smaller imperfections go without disrupting the flow. Here is something deeply important that most English teachers never tell you. Native speakers make errors in speech. They do. They say things grammatically wrong. They lose their train of thought. They restart sentences. They use casual forms that technically break formal grammar rules every single day. And nobody cares because the communication is happening. The meaning is being exchanged. The connection is real. The grammatical imperfections are invisible in the flow of real human communication. But many English learners hold themselves to a standard of perfection that native speakers themselves do not meet. And that standard, that perfectionism, is one of the great enemies of fluency because perfectionism turns the monitor all the way up. Perfectionism makes you check every word, and when you are checking every word, you are not speaking. You are just thinking about speaking, which is not the same thing at all. One more element of native speaker processing that I want to bring to your attention is the role of context in comprehension. When native speakers listen to each other, they are not processing every single word with equal attention. They are using the context, the situation, the relationship, the topic, the tone to fill in gaps and make meaning. They are listening at the level of meaning, not at the level of individual words. This is why native speakers can understand each other even in noisy environments, even when they miss words, even when someone mumbles. The brain is not decoding word by word. It is predicting and confirming meaning at a much higher level. When you learn to listen at the level of meaning rather than at the level of individual words, you become dramatically better at understanding fast English. And the way you develop this skill is through the same process we keep coming back to. Massive exposure to authentic English in real contexts with real communicative purpose. There is one final aspect of native speaker processing that I want to introduce, and it is perhaps the most counterintuitive one. Native speakers are not fully conscious of what they are saying while they are saying it. This sounds strange, but it is deeply true. Much of the language production process happens below the level of conscious awareness. The native speaker consciously knows what they want to communicate, and they consciously receive the output in the form of their own voice. But the process in between, the selection of words, the arrangement of phrases, the grammatical encoding, happens automatically outside of conscious awareness. This is what automaticity looks like at its most developed, and it is the target state for any second language learner who wants genuine fluency. The picture I want you to take from this chapter is of a completely different model of language use, not assembly and checking, but retrieval and trust. Not word by word, but chunk by chunk. Not translating and converting, but meaning flowing directly into language. That is what we are building toward. And in the next chapter, we are going to start talking about the concrete, practical methods that get you there. I want to take a moment to talk about something that is deeply related to native speaker processing, but is rarely discussed in English learning content: the role of pausing and silence in fluent speech. Most learners think that fluency means speaking without any pauses, that truly fluent speakers just produce a continuous, unbroken stream of language with no hesitation and no gaps. This is completely false, and it is a picture of fluency that sets learners up for failure. Native speakers pause. They pause often. They pause to think. They pause for emphasis. They use filler words and phrases while they gather their thoughts. Well, let me think. So right. Actually, these are not signs of struggling. These are the normal features of spontaneous spoken language, and they are present in the speech of every fluent speaker in the world, in every language, without exception. The difference between a learner's pauses and a native speaker's pauses is not quantity. It is the reason for the pause. A learner pauses because the translation engine is searching. A native speaker pauses because they are thinking about what to say next, which is a completely different cognitive process. One pause is caused by a system bottleneck. The other is caused by genuine thinking. When you are working toward fluency, give yourself permission to pause. Use filler words in English. Say you know, or let me think, or actually, or well, not as crutches, but as the natural breathing of language that lets your brain catch up with your mouth in a normal human way. These phrases are chunks, too. They are retrievable units that buy you processing time in a way that sounds natural rather than in a way that sounds like you are stuck. Once you realize that fluent English includes pauses and fillers, a lot of pressure lifts. You are not aiming for a machine-like continuous output. You are aiming for the natural rhythm of a thinking human being who happens to be thinking in English. Chapter 5: The Rewiring Method. How to train your brain to skip translation. Everything we have covered so far has been building to this point. We now understand why the translation habit exists. We understand what thinking in English actually means. We understand why grammar study alone cannot fix this. And we understand how native speakers actually process language. Now it is time to talk about the method. The actual, practical, daily process of rewiring your brain so that translation becomes unnecessary. I am going to give you the rewiring method in a structured way with clear components that build on each other. But before I do, I want to be honest with you about something. This is not a shortcut. There is no shortcut to fluency. Anyone who promises you fluency in 30 days is selling you something, and what they are selling is not real. What I am offering you today is a method, a genuine, research-supported, experience-tested method. But it requires consistency. It requires effort. And it requires you to be willing to feel uncomfortable and slow and wrong during the process, because that discomfort is the sign that rewiring is happening. Discomfort in language learning is not a warning sign. It is a progress sign. With that said, here is the rewiring method. The first component is what I call English immersion windows. An immersion window is a block of time, as long as possible, but at minimum 30 minutes, during which you commit to receiving all input exclusively in English. No native language audio, no native language text, no switching back and forth. You are creating a monolingual English environment inside your own daily life, regardless of what country you live in or what language surrounds you physically. During an immersion window, you might listen to an English podcast. You might watch an English video without subtitles. You might read an English article or book. The content does not need to be at a level where you understand every word. In fact, if you understand every word, it is probably too easy. Aim for content where you understand roughly 70 to 80% without assistance, and allow the other 20 to 30% to wash over you and be absorbed at a subconscious level. The reason immersion windows work is simple. Your brain is not neutral. It defaults to whatever it uses most. If you spend 6 hours a day consuming content in your native language and 30 minutes in English, your brain will always treat English as foreign. But as you shift the balance, as English begins to take up more and more of your daily cognitive space, your brain's relationship to the language shifts. English begins to feel more like home and less like a classroom. The second component is called think out loud. This is a technique that is enormously powerful and that very few learners use because it feels strange and even embarrassing at first. But I promise you, if you do this consistently, it will accelerate your rewiring faster than almost anything else. Think out loud means exactly what it sounds like. You narrate your thoughts, your actions, and your observations in English out loud to no one in particular. You are at home making coffee. You say out loud in English, in a quiet voice, "Okay, I need to put the water in first. The machine is not heating up properly. I should clean this. It is going to be a long day." You are walking to the store. You observe the weather, the people, the shops in English. "It is really hot today. That store looks new. I have not been here before. I wonder when they opened." This might feel ridiculous. I understand, but here is what is happening when you do this. You are breaking the reflex of thinking in your native language. Every time you catch a thought forming in your native language and you redirect it into English, you are weakening the translation habit and strengthening the direct English thought pathway. You are literally practicing the skill you want to develop in the most direct way possible. Over time, think out loud begins to move inward. You start doing it silently as an internal monologue in English. And that internal monologue is what we are calling an English inner voice, which is one of the most powerful indicators of genuine fluency. The third component of the rewiring method is chunk harvesting. Remember what we discussed in the previous chapter about how native speakers use chunks. Your task is to actively collect those chunks and add them to your active vocabulary. Here is how chunk harvesting works. Whenever you are listening to or reading authentic English and you encounter a phrase that feels natural, that sounds like something a real person would actually say, that carries meaning as a whole rather than as individual words, you note it down. Not the individual words, the whole phrase, and you note the context in which it was used. And then you practice using it in your own speech, in your think out loud sessions, in real conversations, until retrieving it feels as automatic as the native speaker who first produced it. Chunks to harvest are everywhere. They are in podcast conversations. They are in TV shows. They are in interviews with native speakers. They are in songs. They are in books. Every piece of authentic English content you consume is a chunk mine. And the richer your chunk library, the faster and more naturally your English flows. The fourth component is tolerance training. This is about training yourself to tolerate imperfection and ambiguity while you rewire. Most English learners have a deep perfectionist reflex. When they do not know a word, they stop. When they make a grammar mistake, they go back and correct it. When they cannot understand something, they pause the audio and replay it again and again. All of these behaviors, while understandable, are actually reinforcing the slow, deliberate, conscious processing mode that you are trying to get away from. Tolerance training means learning to keep going. When you do not know a word, you guess from context and keep going. When you make a mistake, you note it later and keep going. When you cannot catch a phrase, you let it go and keep going. The goal is to train your brain to function in English even under conditions of imperfection and partial understanding, because that is what real communication requires. The fifth component is progressive immersion. This means gradually reducing your native language in context where English is possible, not all at once, not dramatically, but systematically and progressively. Start with one context. Maybe you switch your phone settings to English. Then you start keeping your journal in English. Then you start thinking about your work tasks in English before you start them. One context at a time. You shift the balance until English is not a special activity you do for 30 minutes, but a continuous presence in your daily cognitive life. These 5 components work together. Immersion windows fill your brain with authentic English input. Think out loud forces direct English output without translation. Chunk harvesting builds your library of automatic phrases. Tolerance training removes the perfectionist break from your speech. And progressive immersion shifts your daily language balance toward English over time. I want to add one more thing to the rewiring method that ties all 5 components together, and it is the concept of layered practice. Layered practice means that as you move through your day, you are not doing one thing at a time. You are layering. You listen and shadow during your commute. You think out loud while you work or cook. You harvest chunks during your evening input session. You apply progressive immersion in every available context. Each layer reinforces the others. The input feeds the output. The output tests the input. The chunks from listening appear in your speaking. The speaking reveals the gaps in your listening. Everything connects. This is not one thing you do once. This is a daily practice, a discipline, and like all disciplines, it produces results that feel almost magical when you look back at where you started. But in the moment, it is just work. Good work, honest work, work that changes who you are as a communicator. I want to add a 6th component to the rewiring method that I did not include initially, because I think it is important enough to deserve its own space. I am calling it reality anchoring, and it addresses something that many learners overlook. Reality anchoring means connecting your English practice directly to your real daily concerns, interests, and activities, not to generic practice topics. Most learners practice English with artificial material. They describe pictures. They role-play buying things at a shop. They talk about hypothetical situations. And while these exercises have their place early in learning, they become increasingly limiting as you advance because they keep your English practice separate from your actual life. Reality anchoring means bringing your real life into your English practice. You use your think out loud sessions to process real problems you are facing. You journal in English about real events in your life. You listen to podcasts in English about topics you actually care about, whether that is business, sports, science, religion, cooking, history, or whatever genuinely interests you. You search for English content about your actual profession and your actual concerns. When your English practice is grounded in your real life, two things happen. First, the motivation is much higher and more sustainable because you are learning language that actually matters to you, not language about artificial situations you would never encounter. Second, the vocabulary and chunks you acquire are directly relevant to your real communication needs, which means they become active much faster. You are not just learning English. You are learning your English, the version of the language that fits your actual life and your actual needs. This is the difference between being an English learner and being an English user. And the goal of everything in this video is to move you from one to the other as quickly and as completely as possible. Chapter 6. Building Your English Inner Voice. Of all the concepts we discuss in this video, the English inner voice is perhaps the most transformative and also the most misunderstood. So, I want to spend this entire chapter unpacking it carefully, because if you understand it properly and work to develop it deliberately, it will change your relationship with English in a way that nothing else can. What is the inner voice? Your inner voice is the voice you hear in your mind when you think. The voice that narrates your experience, that helps you plan, that talks you through decisions, that comments on what is happening around you, that reflects on your feelings and your day and your life. Every human being with normal cognitive function has this inner voice, and it operates almost continuously during waking life. The inner voice runs in your dominant language. For most people in the world, their dominant language is their native language, and their inner voice speaks exclusively in that language. This is completely natural, but here is the point. The language your inner voice uses is not fixed. It is not permanent. It is a habit, and habits can be changed. When I say build your English inner voice, I mean this very literally. I mean the practice of deliberately shifting your internal monologue, the voice inside your head, from your native language into English. And I want to be clear, this is not about being perfect. It is not about having a complete, grammatically flawless internal monologue in English from day one. It is about the direction of the attempt. The process of building an English inner voice begins in very small moments. It begins with one thought. You are sitting somewhere, and a simple observation crosses your mind. Maybe you notice that it is getting dark outside. Right now, that observation probably forms in your native language first. What I want you to start doing is catching that moment right at the beginning, right when the thought is forming, and redirecting it into English. It is getting dark. That is it. Just those 4 words. But those 4 words in English, instead of in your native language, represent a tiny piece of rewiring. And tiny pieces of rewiring, done consistently, accumulate into major transformation. The first stage of building the English inner voice is what I call single thought switching. This is exactly what I just described. Every time you catch a thought forming in your native language, you ask yourself, can I express this in English right now? And if you can, you do. Not to replace the native language thought, not to suppress it, just to add an English expression of the same thought. At this stage, bilingual is fine. You have the thought in your native language, and you also have it in English. But you are practicing the English direction. The second stage is phrase extension. Once single thought switching feels relatively comfortable, you begin extending. You have a thought in English, and then you push further. You add more English to it. It is getting dark. I should close the curtains. I wonder if it is going to rain. It is that time of year. You are building a chain of connected English thoughts, one leading to the next in a flow. This is the beginning of genuine English internal monologue. And even if this internal monologue is slow and incomplete at first, the fact that it is happening is deeply significant. The third stage is what I call emotional anchoring. Remember when we discussed earlier that native speakers have emotional connections to their native language words? Basashans, connections built through years of the language being associated with real experiences and feelings. You can build those same connections in English. And the way to do it is through deliberate emotional anchoring. Emotional anchoring means that you deliberately connect English words and phrases to real emotional experiences, not to dictionary definitions, not to their native language equivalents, to actual moments and feelings in your own life. For example, take the English phrase, I am exhausted. Do not think of this as the translation of your native language word for tired. Think of this phrase in connection with a specific memory of being truly exhausted. a late night at work, a long journey, a day of illness. Feel that exhaustion in your body for a moment, and simultaneously say the phrase, I am exhausted inside your mind. You are creating a direct neural connection between the English phrase and the physical and emotional reality it describes. Over time, with repetition, these connections strengthen. And when you are actually exhausted, the English phrase will surface naturally because it is now directly connected to that experience, not just to its translation. You can do this with any word or phrase. Take the most important, most emotionally resonant words in your life and practice anchoring them emotionally in English. Words like love, loss, hope, fear, pride, disappointment, joy, loneliness. These are the words that carry the most emotional weight, and they are often the ones that feel most foreign in a second language because the emotional connections are weakest there. Building those connections is some of the most powerful language work you can do. The fourth stage of building the English inner voice is dreaming and half-sleep thinking. This might surprise you, but it is entirely real. Many advanced English learners and highly fluent bilinguals report that their dreams have shifted to include English, and that, in the half-conscious state between waking and sleep, their thoughts naturally flow in English. You cannot force this to happen on a schedule, but it tends to happen naturally as your English inner voice becomes stronger and more habitual. And when it begins to happen, it is a sign that English has moved into a very deep level of your cognitive life. It means the rewiring has gone deep. Let me tell you something specific you can do in the half-sleep window before you fully wake up in the morning. In those first few minutes when you are conscious but not fully alert, do not reach for your phone. Do not let your native language thoughts rush in. Instead, stay quiet and gently direct your thoughts into English. What did I dream about? What does today look like? These are low-pressure, low-stakes moments where the English inner voice can develop in a relaxed, natural way. Over weeks of this practice, the early morning English window becomes a genuinely productive part of your rewiring process. There is one more thing I want to say about the English inner voice before we move on, and it is something that can be genuinely profound when you encounter it. Many people who develop a strong English inner voice report that they feel slightly different when they think in English, like a different aspect of their personality, their way of seeing things, becomes more present. There is interesting research supporting this. Bilingual individuals often report that they process certain kinds of emotional material differently in their two languages. The second language sometimes allows for more analytical distance, while the native language carries more raw emotional weight. For some people, thinking in English about a problem gives them a kind of clarity or objectivity they struggle to access in their native language. I am not saying English is a better language. I am saying that having access to a second internal voice, a second way of processing your own experience, can be genuinely enriching, not just for your English fluency, but for your own inner life. The English inner voice is not just a language skill. It is a new dimension of your mind, and it is worth developing for that reason alone, entirely apart from any practical benefit to your speaking ability. There is a practical challenge that many learners face when trying to build the English inner voice, and I want to address it directly because it can derail progress if it is not understood. The challenge is cognitive fatigue. When you first begin the deliberate practice of redirecting your thoughts into English, it takes real mental effort. The native language pathway is automatic and effortless. The English pathway is new and requires active construction. So at first, maintaining an English inner voice feels tiring in a way that your native language thinking never does. And when you are tired or stressed, or your cognitive resources are low, the native language inevitably rushes back in. This is completely normal. It is not failure. It is the natural experience of building a new cognitive habit, and there are two things to understand about it. The first is that the fatigue diminishes over time. As the English inner voice becomes more habitual, as the pathways strengthen, as the retrieval of English becomes more automatic, the effort required decreases. What is tiring today becomes effortless in 6 months. This is the nature of all skill development. The early phase is the hardest. The later phases are easier precisely because the early work was done. The second thing to understand is how to manage the fatigue while you are in the early phase. The answer is to practice in short, focused bursts, rather than trying to maintain English thinking for long, unbroken periods. 10 minutes of fully committed English in voice practice is more valuable and more sustainable than 3 hours of half-hearted attempts interspersed with native language thinking. Set a timer. Be fully in English for that window. When the timer ends, give your brain a rest, then come back. This interval approach respects the cognitive limits of the early phase while still accumulating the practice hours that build the habit. Over time, the intervals get longer and the rest periods get shorter until eventually, English thinking is not an inner, full practice at all. It is simply how your mind works. Chapter 7. Speaking Without Thinking. The automaticity principle. There is a moment that every fluent English speaker can remember. Or, if they cannot remember the specific moment, they can remember the period when it happened. It is the moment when they first spoke a full sentence in English without thinking about it, when the words just came, when there was no gap between the thought and the language, when speaking English stopped feeling like a task and started feeling like speaking. That moment feels like something close to magic, but it is not magic. It is automaticity, and automaticity is something you can build deliberately and systematically. In this chapter, I want to explain what automaticity is, why it matters so profoundly for language fluency, and exactly how you build it. In psychology, automaticity refers to the ability to perform a task without conscious attention. When a task becomes automatic, it moves from the slow, deliberate, effortful processing of the conscious mind to the fast, effortless processing of procedural memory. Procedural memory is the system that handles things like how to ride a bike, how to touch type, how to catch a ball. It is the same system that handles the automatic language production of fluent speakers. The science here is clear and consistent. In the early stages of learning any complex skill, including language, performance is slow, error-prone, and effortful because but with sufficient practice of the right kind, performance transitions to the procedural system, where it becomes fast, accurate, and automatic. This transition is called automatization, and it is the goal of every learner, whether they know it or not. What most people do not realize is that automatization requires a very specific kind of practice. It requires practice that is consistent, meaning done repeatedly over time, contextually varied, meaning done in different situations, and with different content, and communicatively meaningful, meaning done with genuine intent to express something real, not just for practice's sake. This is why drilling grammar exercises will never produce automaticity. Grammar exercises are neither contextually varied nor communicatively meaningful. They are isolated, artificial, and disconnected from real communicative purpose. The procedural system does not absorb those kinds of exercises effectively. What it absorbs is real language use in real communicative contexts, repeated over time. Let me give you the most powerful automaticity building technique I know. I call it the shadow and internalize method. The shadow and internalize method has two phases, and they work together to build automatic retrieval of natural English language patterns. Phase 1 is called shadowing. Shadowing is a technique where you listen to a native speaker and you repeat what they are saying simultaneously as if you are their shadow following them with no delay. You are not waiting for them to finish a sentence and then repeating it. You are overlapping with them, speaking at the same time, matching their rhythm, their intonation, their speed, their flow. Shadowing is powerful for several reasons. It trains your articulatory system, the muscles and mechanisms of speech, to produce English at native speed. It trains your ear and your mouth to work together at a pace that normal study never achieves, and it forces you to stop monitoring your output. Because there is simply no time to monitor when you are matching a native speaker's speed. Choose audio content that is slightly above your comfortable level, but not overwhelming. A podcast works well. An interview works well. A speech or talk works well. Listen to a short segment, maybe 30 seconds to a minute. First, without trying to shadow, just to absorb. Then play it again and shadow. Do not worry about getting every word. Do not worry about perfect pronunciation. Just stay in the stream of language. Keep moving. Keep going. Phase 2 is internalization. After shadowing a piece of audio, you put it down and you try to reproduce the content in your own words from memory in English, not word for word, but the ideas, the expressions, the chunks from what you just heard. You speak them into the air to no one, just you and the English. This process of internal reconstruction is where the deep absorption happens, where the patterns move from short-term auditory memory into long-term linguistic knowledge. Do 3 to 5 cycles of shadow and internalize per day. Each cycle might take 10 to 15 minutes. Over weeks and months, the effect compounds. You will notice your English getting faster. You will notice chunks from your shadowing sessions appearing in your real conversations without conscious effort. You will notice that when you want to express something, options come more quickly, more automatically, more fluently. The second automaticity technique I want to give you is pressure speaking. Pressure speaking is exactly what it sounds like. You put yourself in a situation where you must speak English under time pressure, so without the opportunity to stop and think. This simulates the real conditions of live conversation, and training under these conditions is what makes you ready for them. One way to do pressure speaking is the 60-second talk. Pick a topic, any topic at all. Set a timer for 60 seconds. When the timer starts, you begin speaking in English about that topic, and you do not stop until the timer ends. You do not pause. You do not translate. You do not go back and correct yourself. You just speak. Even if the quality is imperfect, even if you repeat yourself, even if you struggle at moments, you keep going for 60 seconds. Then you do it again. Different topic. 60 seconds. Keep going. What this trains is your brain's ability to find language under pressure without falling back on the translation pathway. At first, it will be hard. You will have gaps. You will use simple words because complex ones do not come fast enough. That is fine. That is the starting point. Over time, the vocabulary that is available under pressure expands. The chunks that surface automatically become richer and more varied. The flow becomes smoother because your brain has been trained specifically to produce English under communicative pressure. A third technique worth adding here is what I call the opinion express drill. This is different from simply describing something or narrating an event. The opinion express drill asks you to take a position and defend it in English in real time without preparation. You can do this with any topic. What do you think about working from home? What is the most important quality in a friendship? What would you change about the city you live in? Is technology making life better or worse? Give yourself 30 seconds to think, then speak for at least 2 minutes without stopping, expressing and defending your view. This drill is particularly powerful because opinions require your own genuine thinking. You cannot borrow them from a script. You have to generate them, and generating original thought in English, defending it, elaborating on it, is exactly the kind of demanding real-time production that accelerates automaticity the most. Automaticity is the bridge between knowing English and speaking English, and it is built not in classrooms and not in grammar books, but in the messy, imperfect, brave act of using the language over and over again in real time, under real conditions, with real communicative intent. Every conversation you have in English, no matter how imperfect, is a deposit in the automaticity bank. And those deposits compound over time into fluency. I want to talk about something related to automaticity that is often the missing piece for learners who are doing all the right practice but still feel stuck. The role of confidence as a prerequisite for automatic speech production. This might seem counterintuitive. You might think, I will become confident when I become fluent. When the language is more automatic, the confidence will come. And while there is some truth in that direction, the more important truth runs the other way. Confidence is not just a product of fluency, it is a condition for it. Without a minimum level of confidence, the speech production system cannot shift into automatic mode. The anxiety keeps the monitor engaged. The fear keeps the internal checking running. And as long as the monitor is fully engaged, automaticity cannot take hold. This is why some learners who have genuinely excellent English still cannot access it under pressure. Their fluency is real. Their automatic speech capability is real. But their confidence is low enough that the anxious monitor blocks the automatic system from operating. They know more English than they can use because their emotional state prevents the knowing from becoming doing. The solution is not to wait for confidence to arrive naturally. The solution is to actively build it through what I call deliberate exposure escalation. You start in the lowest pressure English context you can find, places where you feel completely safe to be imperfect. Solo practice, friendly online communities, casual exchanges with patient conversation partners. In these low-pressure environments, you build experiences of successful English communication. Each successful exchange, even a small one, deposits into what I think of as your confidence account. And as that account grows, you can gradually expose yourself to slightly higher pressure contexts, not jumping to the highest stakes immediately, but climbing the ladder one rung at a time, letting each new level of success build the confidence needed for the next. This is how confidence and automaticity develop together, each one feeding the other in an upward spiral that eventually produces the kind of fluid, confident, automatic English that characterizes the speakers you most want to sound like. Chapter 8: Vocabulary that Sticks Without Memorizing. Let me tell you about a very common experience among English learners. You spend 30 minutes memorizing a set of vocabulary words. You test yourself. You know them. The next morning, you have forgotten half of them. A week later, you have forgotten almost all of them. And you feel like there is something wrong with your memory. There is nothing wrong with your memory. What is wrong is the method. The way most people learn vocabulary, looking at a word, seeing its translation, reading a definition, making a flashcard, is fundamentally misaligned with how the brain actually stores and retrieves language. And in this chapter, I am going to give you a completely different approach to vocabulary, one that is based on how the brain actually works, and one that produces vocabulary that sticks not just for days, but permanently. The foundational principle is this: words are not stored in the brain as isolated units with definitions. Words are stored as nodes in a network of associations. Every word is connected to other words, to sounds, to images, to emotions, to physical sensations, to contexts, to memories of when you encountered the word before, to the face and voice of the person who used it, to what you were feeling at the time. The richer this network of associations, the stronger and more easily retrievable the word is. When you learn a word from a flashcard with a translation, you create one association, one thin wire, connecting the new word to its translated equivalent. When real-life circumstances put that word under pressure, that one thin wire is not enough. It breaks. The word disappears from memory. But when you encounter a word multiple times in multiple contexts, connected to real experiences, real emotions, real communicative need, the web of associations around it becomes dense and strong. And a dense, strong web does not break. The word becomes permanently part of your mental vocabulary in a way that no amount of flashcard review can produce. So, here is the method. I call it contextual vocabulary building, and it has 5 principles. Principle 1: learn words in chunks, not isolation. We have talked about chunks throughout this video, and this is where chunking directly intersects with vocabulary. When you encounter a new word, do not just note the word. Note the full chunk in which it appeared. If you hear the word inevitable in the sentence, it was inevitable that this would happen. You note the whole phrase. It was inevitable that, not just the word inevitable, because that is how you will actually use it, not in isolation, but in the context of the chunk that carries it. Principle 2: encounter before exposure. This means that before you formally try to learn a word, You want to encounter it in multiple, real contexts first. When you encounter a word you do not know, do not immediately look it up. Instead, note it down, move on, and see if you encounter it again. The second time you see it, the context might give you a better guess at the meaning. By the third time, you might have a strong enough sense of it to use it yourself. And by the time you look it up to confirm, the multiple contextual encounters have already begun to build this association network around it. The dictionary definition at that point is just the final confirmation of a meaning you have largely already absorbed. Principle 3. Use it or lose it, but use it right. The only way to truly make a word your own is to use it in genuine communication, not in practice exercises. In real speech or writing, where you actually care about communicating something. When you use a word in a real conversation and it successfully expresses what you meant, and the other person understands it, the reinforcement is enormous. Your brain marks that word with a powerful signal. This works. Use this again, and you will. Principle 4. Emotional tagging. We touched on this in the chapter about the inner voice, but it applies directly to vocabulary. When you are learning a word, try to connect it to a real emotional or physical experience. Take the word overwhelmed. Instead of memorizing its definition, connect it to a real memory of being overwhelmed. A moment when everything felt like too much. Feel that memory briefly and pair it with the English word. The emotional connection makes the word retrievable under the conditions in which you will actually need it, which are conditions that involve emotion. Principle 5. Prioritize frequency and utility. Not all words deserve equal attention. English has roughly 170 words in common use, and a native speaker might actively use somewhere between 20 and 35 in their lifetime. But the most frequently used 300 words of English cover roughly 95% of everything written and spoken in everyday contexts. If you know these 300 words well, truly well, deeply embedded through contextual exposure and real use, you can handle the vast majority of English communication you will ever encounter. Focus on frequency. Churium. Do not try to learn every word in the dictionary. Learn the most important words deeply and encounter the rest in context as they appear. I also want to address the question of active versus passive vocabulary because it is crucial and often misunderstood. Your passive vocabulary is the vocabulary you can recognize and understand when you encounter it. Your active vocabulary is the vocabulary you can produce spontaneously in speech and writing. For most English learners, the passive vocabulary is significantly larger than the active vocabulary. They know far more words than they can use. The gap between passive and active vocabulary is where so much of the frustration of being an advanced learner comes from. You understand everything, but cannot say everything you understand. The way to close this gap is through active production practice, specifically the think out loud technique and the pressure speaking exercises from the previous chapter. As you push yourself to produce English under real communicative conditions, your passive vocabulary begins converting into active vocabulary. Words that you recognized but never used become words that flow naturally in your speech. This conversion takes time, and it takes production effort, but it happens reliably and measurably with consistent practice. I want to give you one more practical tool for vocabulary that is deceptively simple, but extraordinarily effective. And it is this: the story method. When you want to lock in a new word, you create a very short, very personal, very vivid story in English that uses that word in context. Not a made-up story about fictional characters. A real story about your own life, even if it is imagined. Take the word resilient. Your story might be, "My mother is resilient. She lost everything twice and rebuilt both times. Now I use the word resilient and I see her face." That connection, personal, visual, emotional, is what makes the word yours permanently. Build your vocabulary the way a tree builds its roots. Not by adding individual roots one at a time in isolation, but by growing into the soil of real English experience, letting the roots spread and deepen naturally through contact with authentic, meaningful language. The vocabulary that grows this way is not something you memorized and might forget. It is something you absorbed and own. Before we leave the topic of vocabulary, I want to give you one more framework that completely changes how you relate to the words you know versus the words you are still learning. I call it the vocabulary ownership spectrum, and it has 3 zones. Zone 1 is borrowed vocabulary. These are words you know the meaning of and can recognize in context, but you do not yet own them productively. If someone uses the word meticulous in front of you, you understand it. But if you are mid-sentence and need to describe someone who pays close attention to detail, the word meticulous does not come to you automatically. It is borrowed, not owned. You can receive it, but cannot yet produce it reliably. Zone 2 is rented vocabulary. These are words you can produce, but not automatically. You have used them before, and they have worked, size, but accessing them still requires a small conscious effort. You think the word and choose it deliberately. It is available, but not yet instant. Most of your advanced vocabulary probably lives in this zone. Zone 3 is owned vocabulary. These are the words that come without thinking. The words that appear in your speech and writing without any conscious retrieval effort. The words that are part of your automatic language production system. These are truly yours. They have been absorbed so deeply through repeated use and exposure that they are as automatic as your native language words. The goal of vocabulary development is not to move words from unknown to known. It is to move words from unknown all the way to Zone 3, to full ownership. And the path from Zone 1 through Zone 2 to Zone 3 is exactly what we have been describing throughout this chapter. Multiple contextual encounters, emotional anchoring, genuine communicative use, story associations, production under pressure. Each of these moves words further along the spectrum from borrowed to rented to owned. And owned vocabulary is the vocabulary of fluency. Chapter 9. The Daily Brain Drill. A complete practice system. Everything we have discussed in this video is genuinely valuable. The concepts, the insights, the reframings. But insight without practice is just entertainment. And so this chapter is purely practical. I am going to give you a complete daily practice system, broken down into time blocks that you can begin tomorrow. A system that, if you follow it consistently, will rewire your English brain within months in ways that will surprise you. I am calling it the Daily Brain Drill, and it is designed around the real life of a busy person. You do not need to quit your job or move to an English-speaking country. You need 45 minutes to 75 minutes per day, distributed across your existing schedule. That is it. Let me walk you through the full system. The morning activation, 10 minutes. The very first cognitive moments of your day are powerful. Your brain is fresh, your conscious defenses are low, and whatever you engage with first tends to set the tone for your mental state throughout the day. Use this window for English. As soon as you are awake, before you reach for your phone, before you check messages, before you enter your native language mental world, take 10 minutes for what I call the English morning activation. This starts with 30 seconds of intention. You simply say to yourself in English what your intentions are for the day. Nothing complex. Today, I need to finish the report. I have a meeting in the afternoon. I'm going to try to get some exercise. I need to call my friend back. Simple statements. In English, out loud or as a strong internal monologue. This is not a performance. It is a signal to your brain that today is an English day. Then, spend the remaining 9 to 9 and 1 to 2 minutes in English audio input. Choose a podcast or audio program in English that is at a level slightly above comfortable. Listen without subtitles. Let the English wash into your freshly awakened brain. Do not worry about understanding every word. Just receive it. Let it establish English as the operating language of your mind for this new day. The commute or morning tasks window, 15 minutes. Whether you are commuting, exercising, cooking breakfast, or getting ready, you likely have 15 to 20 minutes of time that does not require full cognitive attention. This is your chunk and shadow window. Play a short audio clip from a podcast, interview, or talk, something between 2 and 5 minutes long. Listen once. Then shadow it. Speak out loud, matching the speaker's rhythm and flow. Do this 2 or 3 times with the same clip. Then put it down and internalize it. Speak the ideas from it in your own words for 2 to 3 minutes. This is where your chunk library grows. This is where automaticity is built. 15 minutes a day of shadow and internalized practice, done consistently, produces extraordinary results over 3 to 6 months. The midday Think Out Loud session, 10 minutes. At some point during your midday break or a quiet moment in your afternoon, take 10 minutes for dedicated Think Out Loud practice. Find a private moment, even if it is in a bathroom or on a walk, and narrate in English. Start with the 60-second topic drill. Pick a topic and speak about it for 60 seconds without stopping. Do 3 to 5 rounds with different topics. Topics can be anything. Describe what you ate for breakfast and why you chose it. Explain how your morning went. Describe your neighborhood as if you were showing it to a visitor. Talk about a film you have seen recently. Explain your job to someone who knows nothing about it. Talk about a problem you are trying to solve. After your 60-second drills, spend 3 to 5 minutes on free English thinking. Let your mind wander in English. Think about whatever naturally occurs to you, but deliberately redirect the thoughts into English as they form. This is the middle stage of building your English inner voice, and the midday session is a powerful window for it. The evening deep input session, 15 to 20 minutes. The evening session is your longest and deepest English engagement of the day. This is where you consume longer-form English content in a more sustained way. Choose content you are genuinely interested in. A documentary, a long-form interview, an English book, either audio or text, an English podcast on a topic you actually care about. The key word here is genuine interest. Language acquisition accelerates dramatically when the content is intrinsically engaging because your brain allocates more cognitive resources to processing it. For this session, the rule is no native language assistance, no subtitles in your native language, no pausing to look up every word. You are practicing tolerance and contextual comprehension. Let the content flow. Take notes in English of anything particularly interesting or of chunks you want to harvest, but do not interrupt the immersion. After the content, take 5 minutes to journal in English. Just 3 to 5 sentences about what you consumed. What was interesting about it? What you agreed or disagreed with? What it made you think about? This is your active production practice after a period of input, and it converts passive reception into active language processing. The pre-sleep review. 5 minutes. As you prepare to sleep, Take 5 minutes for an English inner voice review of your day. This is done entirely internally as a silent mental monologue. What happened today? What was good about it? What was difficult? What are you thinking about? What are you looking forward to tomorrow? Do this in English. Quietly, gently, without pressure. This practice serves two purposes. It strengthens the English inner voice in the deepest, most personal cognitive space you have, your own reflective thought, and it plants English in your brain at the moment just before sleep, which is a neurologically significant time for memory consolidation. There is a weekly extension to the daily brain drill that I want to give you as well. Once a week, spend 30 to 45 minutes in what I call a deep dive conversation. This means a real English conversation with a real person, either a native speaker or a fluent non-native speaker, where you commit to keeping the conversation entirely in English for the full duration. No switching, no mixing languages. Fully English. This weekly deep dive is where everything you practiced during the week gets tested under real conditions. It is also where the biggest leaps in fluency often happen because real human interaction triggers cognitive and emotional engagement that solo practice cannot fully replicate. If you do not have access to a conversation partner, use English-speaking communities online. There are forums, voice chat communities, and speaking exchange programs where you can find English speakers who want to practice. The tool is less important than the commitment to regular, real English interaction. I also want to give you a monthly reflection practice. Once a month, record yourself speaking in English for 5 to 7 minutes on any topic. Put the recording somewhere you can listen back to it. Do not cringe. Listen with the ears of a coach, not a critic. Notice the progress. Notice the chunks that are coming more naturally now. Notice the moments where the English flows without effort. These recordings are a concrete, undeniable record of your improvement. They are the evidence that the rewiring is happening, and on the days when you feel like nothing is working, you can play them back and hear the proof that it is. Here is the full daily brain drill in summary. Morning activation. 10 minutes of intention setting and English audio to start the day. Commute window. 15 minutes of shadow and internalize with a short audio clip. Midday. Think out loud. 10 minutes of 60-second topic drills and free English thinking. Evening. Deep input. 15 to 20 minutes of genuine English content consumption and a short English journal entry. Pre-sleep review. 5 minutes of English inner voice review of the day. Total 50 to 65 minutes per day, distributed across naturally occurring moments in your schedule. If you do this consistently every single day for 3 months, the change in your English fluency, speed, confidence, and naturalness will be dramatic. Not because this program is magical, but because you will have given your brain the consistent, varied, meaningful exposure and practice that rewiring actually requires. Consistency is the key word. 50 minutes every day beats 5 hours, once a week. Daily practice keeps the pathways active and strengthening. Weekly blitzes followed by long gaps allow those same pathways to weaken before they are reinforced again. You have the system now. What remains is the decision to use it. I want to give you one more element of the daily brain drill that addresses a specific challenge many learners face: the weekend collapse. The weekend collapse is what happens when learners who have been practicing consistently Monday through Friday suddenly spend the weekend entirely in their native language environment, socializing in their native language, consuming media in their native language, thinking about everything in their native language, and arrive on Monday morning feeling like they are starting over. Like all the progress of the week has somehow evaporated. Like the English brain has gone to sleep. This is a real phenomenon, and it happens because the English pathways you are building are still relatively fragile in the early and middle stages of rewiring. They need daily activation to stay strong. When they go dormant for 2 days, the native language reasserts its dominance. Not completely, but noticeably. The solution is not to eliminate your weekend life in your native language. That would be both impossible and joyless. The solution is a weekend maintenance routine that takes no more than 20 minutes per day and keeps the English pathways alive even during social days. The weekend maintenance routine looks like this. In the morning, 10 minutes of English audio, something genuinely engaging. In the evening, 5 minutes of English, journaling about your weekend so far. That is it. 20 minutes, total split between morning and evening. It is not transformative practice on its own, but it is enough to keep the pathways activated so that Monday does not feel like starting over. The English brain stays warm. The progress holds, and the week ahead can build on what the week before built, rather than having to recover lost ground first. Think of it like a fire. You do not need to add enormous logs every day to keep it burning. Sometimes you just need a few small pieces of wood to keep the coals hot overnight. The weekend routine is those small pieces of wood. Small. Consistent. Enough. Chapter 10. The Final Shift. Making English Feel Like Home. We have come a long way together in this video. We started with the question of why your brain translates, and we have moved through understanding the nature of native speaker fluency, chunks, the process of rewiring, the building of an English inner voice, the principles of automaticity, the right approach to vocabulary, and a complete daily practice system. Now, in this final chapter, I want to talk about something that goes beyond technique, something that is ultimately about your identity and your relationship with the English language. Because here is something that nobody in an English class is going to tell you. Fluency is not just a skill, it is a relationship. And like any relationship, it requires more than competence. It requires genuine engagement. It requires presence. It requires the willingness to be vulnerable. It requires, ultimately, the decision to let English become a real part of who you are. There is a concept in language acquisition research called the affective filter. It was proposed by the linguist Stephen Krashen, and in simple terms, it describes the emotional barrier that can block language learning even when the learner has sufficient cognitive ability and sufficient exposure. When a learner feels anxious, embarrassed, defensive, or resistant about a language, the affective filter rises and language input that might otherwise be absorbed is blocked. The brain is in a defensive state, and defensive states are the opposite of acquisition states. Think about the moments when you feel most comfortable speaking English. Maybe it is when you are with a very patient conversation partner. Maybe it is when you are alone practicing. Maybe it is when you are not being evaluated or corrected. In those moments, your affective filter is low, and those are the moments when the most acquisition happens. And think about the moments when speaking English feels most difficult. When someone seems impatient. When you feel embarrassed about your accent. When you are in a formal setting being judged. In those moments, the filter is high. The anxiety is blocking what you already know from coming out. This is why so many learners know far more English than they can produce under pressure. It is not a memory problem. It is a filter problem. Lowering your affective filter permanently requires a shift in how you think about English and about yourself as an English speaker. The first part of that shift is accepting your accent. Your accent is not a flaw. Your accent is evidence of a journey. It is the mark of someone who took on the enormous challenge of becoming fluent in a language they were not born into. Every accent tells a story, and native English speakers, in the vast majority of cases, do not care about accent nearly as much as non-native speakers fear they do. What they care about is connection. What they care about is understanding, and both of those things are fully compatible with any accent. There are hundreds of English accents, even among native speakers. British accents and American accents and Australian accents and Irish accents and Canadian accents and Singaporean accents and South African accents and Nigerian accents and Indian accents and dozens of regional variations within each of those. English has never had one right pronunciation. It never will. And your accent, influenced by your native language, is simply one more expression of the extraordinary diversity of this world language. Stop apologizing for it. Stop hiding it. Speak with it clearly and confidently, and it will become part of your unique English voice. The second part of the final shift is embracing mistakes as data. I said this earlier, and I want to say it again even more directly now. Every mistake you make in English is information. It is your brain making its best attempt with its current resources. Mistakes are not failures. They are iterations. They are the mechanism of improvement. Every learner who became fluent made thousands and thousands of mistakes on the way there. The difference between them and the learners who stayed stuck is simply that they kept going after the mistakes. They did not take the mistakes as evidence that they should stop. They took them as evidence that they were in the process of learning, which is exactly what they were. Embrace your mistakes. When you make one, notice it. Learn from it if there is something to learn, and move on. Do not dwell. Do not replay it with shame. Do not add it to a mental file of reasons why you cannot do this. Move on and keep speaking. The third part of the final shift is developing an English persona, and I want to explain this carefully because it can be misunderstood. Developing an English persona does not mean pretending to be someone you are not. It does not mean abandoning your culture, your values, or your identity. What it means is recognizing that when you express yourself in English, you are a slightly different version of yourself. Not a false one, but a version that has internalized a different linguistic and cultural framework. This is not strange. This is what every bilingual or multilingual person experiences. You are the same person, but different languages bring out different facets of that person. Lean into your English persona. Give yourself permission to be more expressive in English, or more direct, or more playful. Whatever the language naturally brings out in you. Explore who you are in English. Let English be a space where you can try on different ways of speaking and thinking, where you can take risks with expression that feel too risky in your native language, where you can develop a voice that is authentically yours. But in this new medium, some of the most interesting and compelling English speakers in the world are not native speakers. They bring a richness of perspective, a sharpness of observation, a care with words that comes from having earned the language rather than been given it. Your relationship with English has depth precisely because it was not easy, because you worked for it, because it required something of you, and that depth shows. It shows in the way you choose your words. It shows in the gratitude you feel for the language that has opened doors for you. And it shows in the authenticity of a voice that had to fight to exist. The fourth and final part of the final shift is this. Decide that English is yours, not borrowed, not temporary, not something you use only when you have to. Yours. A language you chose. A language you fought for. A language that is now a legitimate part of your intellectual and emotional life. This decision is not made once. It is made every day in the small choices that accumulate into identity. The choice to think a thought in English when you could just as easily think it in your native language. The choice to read the English article instead of waiting for a translation. The choice to respond in English even when the conversation could switch to your native tongue. The choice to practice when you are tired and would rather not. These are not just practice decisions. They are identity decisions. Each one is a vote for who you are becoming. I want to tell you something about what happens at the end of this journey, or rather at what feels like the end. Because the truth is, there is no end. When you reach a point of genuine fluency, when English has been rewired into your thinking, when the translation step has been eliminated, when your English inner voice is strong and natural and present, what you discover is not the absence of effort. What you discover is the presence of joy, the joy of expressing a complex thought clearly and exactly in a language that was once foreign to you. The joy of connecting with another human being across cultural and linguistic distance. The joy of reading something beautiful in English and feeling it not as a translation, but as a direct experience. These are not small joys. They are profound ones. Here is the truth about language fluency that I want to leave you with. And I want you to remember this long after this video ends. There is no finish line. Fluency is not a destination you arrive at and then stay. It is a living, dynamic, ongoing relationship with a language. Native speakers are still growing in their language every day, still encountering new words, new expressions, new ways of putting things, still being surprised by the language they have spoken since birth. Your relationship with English will be the same. It will never be complete. It will always be growing. And that is not a burden. That is the beauty of it. You will have days when your English feels sharp and natural and free. And you will have days when it feels slow and heavy and stuck. Both are normal. Both are part of the journey. What matters is not the quality of any single day. What matters is the direction of the journey and that you keep walking. The question I asked you at the beginning of this video, the phrase you always translate in your head before you can say it, go back to that comment now. Read what you wrote and ask yourself, after everything you have heard today, after the understanding you now have about why that translation happens and how to begin changing it, does that phrase feel different? Does it feel like a permanent limitation, or does it feel like a habit that is ready to be changed? I believe it is a habit ready to be changed. I believe genuinely that every single person watching this video has the capacity to think in English, to speak without translating, to reach a level of fluency that right now might feel impossible, but is not. It is not impossible. It is just a process. And the process begins today with the first English thought you choose to think. The first English word you choose to say without translating it from something else first. That is the speaking reset. Not a course, not a trick. A decision to reset your relationship with English from the ground up and rebuild it on a foundation of genuine thought, genuine expression, and genuine fluency. Thank you for spending this time with me. If this video gave you something real, share it with one person who needs it. Subscribe to this channel because we have much more to explore together. And leave your comment below, both the phrase you wrote at the beginning and what you are going to do differently starting today. The journey continues, and I will see you in the next one. There is something I want to say in this final chapter that I have been building toward throughout the entire video, and I want to say it plainly. The reason most people never achieve real fluency in English is not what they think it is. It is not lack of time. It is not lack of intelligence. It is not lack of resources. It is not even lack of practice exactly. It is lack of belief that the shift is possible. A deep, quiet, often unacknowledged belief that the translation habit is just who they are. That this is how their English will always work. That fluency in the sense of direct, automatic, untranslated English expression is for other people. People who started earlier. People with a better language aptitude. People who are just different somehow. That belief is a lie, a comfortable, familiar lie because it excuses inaction. If fluency is not possible for you, then you do not have to work for it. You do not have to be vulnerable. You do not have to fail and try again. You can just accept where you are and stop reaching. But fluency is possible for you. It is possible for every adult learner who commits to the right process and sustains that commitment long enough. The neuroscience is clear on this. The evidence from real learners around the world is overwhelming. The brain's capacity to rewire does not expire at childhood. It diminishes somewhat with age, yes. It requires more deliberate effort in an adult than in a 3-year-old, but it does not disappear. It is always present, and it responds to the right inputs the same way it always has, by building stronger pathways where the pathways are used. You have all the equipment you need. You have the brain. You have the knowledge base. You have now the method. What you are choosing today is whether to use these things or to set them down and go back to the old story about why it cannot work for you. I hope you choose to use them. I genuinely do, because on the other side of this process, there is a version of you who speaks English without thinking about speaking English, who connects with people across the world without the friction of translation, who reads and hears things in English and feels them directly, not through the distorting lens of conversion from one language to another, who has not just learned a skill, but grown into a richer, more expansive version of themselves through the work of earning a language. That version of you is not far away. It is a decision and a daily practice away. Make the decision, start the practice, and reset the speaking.